Sarah Chen adjusted her academy uniform one more time before stepping into the massive lecture hall. The fabric felt strange against her skin, designed for beings with different physiologies than her own. Around her, hundreds of alien students filled the tiered seating, their conversations creating a symphony of clicks, hisses, and melodic tones that no human throat could produce. She was the only human in a sea of scales, fur, chitin, and crystalline formations. The Galactic Military Academy on Zerion Prime was the most prestigious institution in known space. Species from across the galaxy sent their brightest young minds here to learn the arts of war, diplomacy, and cosmic defense. Sarah had earned her place through exceptional test scores and recommendations that painted her as a brilliant but unremarkable human student from Earth's outer colonies. If only they knew the truth. "Attention, cadets," Professor Vextai called out, his four arms gesturing gracefully as his translator device converted his native tongue into standard galactic. The insectoid being's compound eyes swept across the room. "Today we begin our study of the Great War that nearly destroyed our galaxy 50 years ago." Sarah's blood ran cold. She forced herself to maintain a neutral expression, even as memories threatened to surface like fragments of a nightmare she could never escape. The professor's holographic display flickered to life, showing star maps marked with the devastation of that terrible conflict. "The Devourers came from beyond our galaxy's edge, a species so violent, so consumed with destruction, that they sought to consume all life in their path." Around her, alien students shifted uncomfortably. Even 50 years later, the memory of the Devourer invasion haunted every civilized world. Sarah had read the official histories, knew what the galaxy believed about those dark years. But she also knew what really happened, because she had been there. "The war lasted 7 years, Professor Vextai continued. "Billions died. Entire worlds were stripped bare and left as lifeless husks. Our combined fleets seemed powerless against their technology and their endless hunger for destruction." A Zalarian student, her blue scales shimmering with nervous energy, raised a tentacled arm. "Professor, the records say the tide of war changed suddenly, that some unknown force began striking at Devourer strongholds with unprecedented effectiveness. Do we know what that was?" The professor's mandibles clicked thoughtfully. "Ah, yes, the mysterious savior that military historians call the Ghost. Someone or something that appeared from nowhere and began systematically dismantling Devourer operations. Ships would explode without warning. Commanders would vanish. Supply lines would be severed with surgical precision." Sarah remembered the weight of the plasma rifle in her hands, the way Devourer chitin cracked under her improvised explosives, the look of pure terror in their black eyes when they realized that something was hunting them in return. She remembered being 17 years old and already the most wanted being in the galaxy. "The Ghost was never identified," the professor continued. "After the war ended, they simply vanished. Some believe it was a team of elite operatives. Others think it was some kind of advanced artificial intelligence, but the effectiveness was undeniable." A massive Gorian student, his rocky hide scarred from combat training, rumbled a question. "How could one entity be so effective against an entire invasion force?" "The records suggest intimate knowledge of Devourer weaknesses," Vextai replied. "Whoever or whatever the Ghost was, they understood the enemy better than our best military minds. They struck at precisely the right targets, at precisely the right moments." Sarah closed her eyes briefly, remembering the Devourer prisoner she had interrogated on the asteroid mining station where her family had died. How she had learned their language, their tactics, their fears. How desperation and rage had transformed a frightened teenager into something that even nightmares feared. After the lecture, Sarah walked through the academy's corridors, passing groups of alien students discussing the lesson. She caught fragments of conversation in a dozen different languages, but the topic was always the same. The ghost had become a legend, a story told to inspire hope and courage. None of them knew they were walking beside their legend. "Sarah!" a voice called out. She turned to see Crixinel, a young Altarian whose golden fur marked him as nobility among his people. He had been assigned as her study partner, and his friendly demeanor had made him one of the few beings at the academy who seemed genuinely interested in befriending a human. "That was quite a lecture," he said, falling into step beside her. "I've always wondered about the ghost. My father fought in the war, you know. He was part of the Third Fleet when it was nearly destroyed at the Battle of Crimson Nebula." Sarah nodded, remembering that battle clearly. She had been aboard a captured Devourer ship, setting charges while the fleet engaged above. "He survived?" "Barely. He said that just when all hope seemed lost, Devourer ships started exploding from within. Their formation collapsed, and our fleet managed to escape." Crixnell's ears twitched with excitement. "My father always believed the ghost was watching that battle, protecting our ships." He had been right. Sarah had spent 3 weeks infiltrating the Devourer fleet before that engagement, learning their tactics and preparing her strikes. She had saved thousands of lives that day, including apparently Crixnell's father. "Your father sounds like a brave warrior," she said simply. They entered the Academy's vast library, where students from dozens of species studied together under the soft glow of bioluminescent panels. Sarah had always felt most comfortable here, surrounded by knowledge and history. Books and data files couldn't judge her for her past or question her presence. "I'm working on a tactical analysis project," Crixnell explained, leading her to a quiet study alcove. "I want to understand how the ghost operated. Maybe we can learn something that would help in future conflicts." Sarah's stomach clenched. "What kind of analysis?" "Battle patterns, target selection, timing of operations. My professor thinks understanding the ghost's methods could revolutionize military strategy." He activated a holographic display showing dozens of battle sites from the war. "I've been mapping every known ghost operation, looking for patterns." The display showed Sarah's own handiwork across 7 years of desperate warfare. Devourer command ships destroyed, supply convoys ambushed, breeding facilities obliterated before they could spawn new armies. Each glowing dot represented weeks or months of planning, of moving through hostile territory, of killing to protect the innocent. "Look at this pattern," Crixinel said, highlighting a series of operations near the spiral arm. The ghost always struck at logistical targets first, then command structures. But notice the timing. Each operation was perfectly coordinated with fleet movements, as if they had access to our highest military planning. He was getting dangerously close to the truth. Sarah had indeed infiltrated military communications throughout the war, not through any official channels, but by hacking, stealing, and sometimes torturing information from captured Devourer intelligence officers who had been monitoring galactic communications. "Maybe they were just good at predicting enemy movements," Sarah suggested carefully. "No, this is too precise. The ghost had to have inside information." Crixinel's golden eyes gleamed with the excitement of discovery. "I think the ghost was working directly with Galactic Command, possibly as part of a secret program." That assumption had probably saved her from discovery over the years. Military leadership had been happy to let people believe the ghost was their operation, rather than admit they had no idea who was conducting the most effective operations of the war. "What does it matter now?" Sarah asked. "The war is over. The Devourers are gone." "Are they?" Crixinel's voice dropped to a whisper. "There have been reports. Ships disappearing near the galactic rim, planets going silent. Some believe the Devourers are returning." Sarah felt the familiar chill of old nightmares. She had hoped the Devourers were extinct, but she had learned long ago that hope was a luxury she couldn't afford. If they were returning, the galaxy would need the ghost again. But the ghost had been a desperate teenager fighting for survival. Sarah Chen was supposed to be a normal academy student, working toward a quiet career in military logistics. She had built this new identity carefully, creating a paper trail of a boring, unremarkable life on a distant colony world. "Even if they are returning," she said finally, "what could we do? We're just students." "We could be ready," Crixinel replied with determination. "We could study the ghost's methods, understand how they fought, maybe train others to follow in their footsteps." That evening, Sarah stood alone on one of the Academy's observation decks, looking out at the alien stars. The Academy was built on a floating platform in Xerion Prime's upper atmosphere, offering a spectacular view of the gas giant's swirling storms and the cosmic vista beyond. She thought about her life before the Academy. After the war ended, she had spent years moving from world to world, taking odd jobs and staying ahead of anyone who might recognize her. She had changed her name, altered her appearance, and created false records. Sarah Chen was her fourth identity since the war. The solitude had been crushing. During the war, she had been driven by purpose and rage. In peace, she was just a young woman carrying the weight of countless deaths and the memories of horrors that would break most minds. She had considered suicide more than once, but something always stopped her. Maybe it was the hope that someday she could use her skills to protect people again. Maybe it was just stubborn refusal to let the Devourers win by destroying her spirit even after their defeat. "Can't sleep?" Sarah spun, her hand instinctively reaching for a weapon that wasn't there. Behind her stood Commander Thalex, one of the Academy's senior instructors. The reptilian being moved with the fluid grace of a predator, his scales shifting color slightly in the artificial light. "Just thinking, sir," Sarah replied, forcing herself to relax. Thalex joined her at the observation window, his ancient eyes reflecting the starlight. "About Professor Vextai's lecture on the war?" Sarah nodded carefully. "It's hard to imagine what it must have been like." "I was there," Thalex said quietly. "I commanded a cruiser in the Fifth Fleet, lost most of my crew to a Devourer boarding action near the Helix Worlds. I'm sorry for your loss, sir." "The strange thing," Thalex continued, "was how suddenly the tide turned. One day we were losing badly. The next, Devourer operations were falling apart everywhere. It was as if some guardian angel was watching over us." Sarah remained silent, unsure how to respond. "I've spent years studying the war records," the commander said. "The Ghost's operations were remarkable not just for their effectiveness, but for their surgical precision. Minimal collateral damage, perfect intelligence, flawless execution. Whoever they were, they fought with the skill of a veteran, but the conscience of an idealist." "Do you think they were human?" Sarah asked before she could stop herself. Thalex's head turned toward her with sharp interest. "Why do you ask that?" Sarah's mind raced for a safe answer. "Earth was one of the world's hardest hit early in the war. Maybe a human survivor had reason to fight back." "Possible," Thalex mused. "The Ghost's methods did show a certain improvisational creativity that humans are known for, but they would have needed incredible training and resources. Or incredible motivation," Sarah suggested. They stood in comfortable silence for a while, watching the cosmic dance of gas and starlight outside. Finally, Thalex spoke again. "There's something you should know, Cadet Chen. Intelligence reports suggest the Devourers may not be completely extinct. If that's true, the galaxy will need heroes again." Sarah felt her carefully constructed new life beginning to crumble around her. "What kind of reports?" "Missing colonies, ships that vanish without distress calls, patterns that match early Devourer scouting operations." Thalex's scales darkened to a troubled hue. "Command is keeping it quiet to avoid panic, but we may be facing a new invasion." The weight of destiny settled on Sarah's shoulders like a familiar burden. She had hoped for peace, for a chance to be normal. But the galaxy had other plans. "If that happens," she said carefully, "I hope someone will be ready to fight back." Thalex studied her with those ancient eyes. "Indeed. Sleep well, Cadet Chen." As the commander walked away, Sarah remained at the window, staring out at the stars. Somewhere in that vast darkness, an old enemy might be stirring. And if they were, the ghost would need to return. But first, she had to figure out how to be a hero without destroying the new life she had built. How to save the galaxy again without revealing that she had saved it before. The stars offered no answers, only the cold promise of battles yet to come. 3 months had passed since Commander Thalex's warning, and Sarah had thrown herself into her studies with desperate intensity. Every tactical manual, every historical analysis, every scrap of intelligence about devourer operations that existed in the Academy's vast databases. She told herself she was just being a dedicated student, but the truth was simpler and more terrifying. The nightmares had returned. Not the old nightmares of her family's death or the horrors she had witnessed during the war. These were new dreams, visions of devourer ships emerging from dark space, of colonies screaming for help that would never come, of herself standing powerless while the galaxy burned again. "Sarah, you look terrible," Crixnell observed as they sat in the Academy cafeteria. Around them, alien students chatted and laughed over meals adapted for their various physiologies. The Altarian's golden fur was dimmed with concern. "When's the last time you actually slept?" Sarah picked at her protein ration, designed to meet human nutritional needs but lacking any resemblance to actual food. "I've been studying for the tactical assessment. The assessment isn't for another 2 weeks." Crixnell leaned closer, lowering his voice. "Is this about my ghost project? I know I've been obsessive about it, but I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable." If only he knew how uncomfortable. His analysis had become disturbingly accurate, mapping the ghost's operations with mathematical precision. He had even begun to identify her infiltration routes and safe houses, though he interpreted them as evidence of a vast intelligence network, rather than one very paranoid teenager. "It's fine," Sarah lied. "I just want to be prepared." Prepared for what? It's a simulation exercise. Before Sarah could answer, alarms began blaring throughout the cafeteria. Emergency lights bathed everything in harsh red as students looked around in confusion. The universal translation system crackled to life with an announcement that made Sarah's blood freeze. "All students report to emergency stations immediately. This is not a drill. Repeat, this is not a drill." Through the massive windows overlooking Zarian Prime's swirling storms, Sarah could see ships ascending from the planet's surface. Not the sleek vessels of the galactic fleet, but the dark, angular forms she remembered from her worst nightmares. The Devourers had returned. Commander Thalex's voice cut through the chaos as he entered the cafeteria with a squad of armed instructors. "All cadets remain calm and follow evacuation procedures. The Academy is now under military protocol." Students began moving toward designated emergency areas, but Sarah found herself frozen, staring at the approaching ships. She could see the distinctive energy patterns of their weapons charging, the predatory way they moved through space like sharks scenting blood. "Sarah!" Crixnell grabbed her arm. "We have to go." She allowed herself to be pulled along, but her mind was racing. These weren't scouts or an advance force. The ships she could see represented a full invasion fleet, larger than anything the Devourers had fielded during the original war. They had learned, adapted, grown stronger during their absence. The emergency shelter was a reinforced section deep within the Academy's core structure. Hundreds of students from dozens of species crowded together, their fear creating a symphony of worried sounds. Sarah pressed herself against a wall, trying to think. She had weapons hidden in her quarters. Military-grade plasma charges, a modified rifle she had kept from the war, combat armor disguised as exercise equipment. Everything she had told herself she would never need again. "Attention, cadets," Commander Thalax announced as he entered the shelter. His scales had shifted to a deep, troubled purple. "I'm authorized to inform you that Devourer forces have launched simultaneous attacks on 17 worlds across the Outer Rim. Zerion Prime is now under siege." A wave of panic rippled through the crowd. Some students began praying to their various deities. Others tried to contact their families on distant worlds. "Our defense fleet is responding," Thalax continued, "but we must prepare for the possibility of a ground assault. All cadets with combat training will be armed and assigned to defensive positions." Sarah's hand shot up. "Sir, what about evacuation? The Devourers have established a blockade. No ships can leave the system." The commander's ancient eyes found hers in the crowd. "We fight here, or we die here." That night, as the Academy shuddered under orbital bombardment, Sarah sat in her quarters staring at the weapons she had revealed from their hiding places. Outside her window, the aurora-like glow of energy shields flickered as they absorbed the enemy fire. Her plasma rifle felt familiar in her hands. Like greeting an old friend, she had modified it extensively during the war, adding targeting systems and power boosters that made it far more effective than standard military equipment. Her armor bore no insignia or identification, just the scars of countless battles. She was no longer Cadet Sarah Chen. She was the Ghost, and the galaxy needed her again. The choice should have been simple, but it wasn't. Revealing herself meant destroying the life she had built, the identity she had crafted, the hope of ever being normal. But not revealing herself meant watching innocent people die when she could save them. A soft chime indicated someone was at her door. Sarah quickly covered her weapons and activated the entry system. Crixinel stood in the corridor, his golden fur dulled with exhaustion and fear. "Can't sleep either?" he asked. "No," Sarah admitted, stepping aside to let him enter. "Too much happening." Crixinel collapsed into her single chair, his ears drooping with defeat. "My homeworld is under attack. I tried to contact my family, but communications are jammed." Sarah felt a familiar ache in her chest. She remembered the desperate hours after her colony's destruction, trying to reach anyone, hoping against hope that someone had survived. "I keep thinking about the Ghost," Crixinel continued, "wondering what they would do if they were here, how they would fight back." "Maybe the Ghost was just lucky," Sarah suggested. "Right place, right time." "No." Crixinel shook his head firmly. "I've studied every operation, every tactical decision. The Ghost wasn't lucky. They were brilliant." "They understood war in a way our military leaders never did." He looked up at her with desperate hope. "I think they're still out there somewhere. I think when the galaxy needs them most, they'll return." Sarah turned to look out the window, where distant explosions lit the darkness like deadly fireworks. "What makes you so sure?" "Because heroes don't just disappear," Crixinel said simply. "They wait until they're needed again." The irony was crushing. Here was her closest friend at the Academy, placing all his hope in a legend without knowing that legend was sitting 3 feet away from him. The next morning brought worse news. The defense fleet had been scattered. Orbital installations were falling one by one, and Devourer dropships were beginning to penetrate the upper atmosphere. The Academy's shields were holding, but everyone knew it was only a matter of time. In the tactical briefing room, senior cadets gathered around a holographic display showing the battle's progression. The Devourers had learned from their previous defeat. Their new ships were larger, their weapons more powerful, and their tactics more sophisticated. "Conventional resistance will fail," declared Zephyra, a crystalline being whose species communicated through harmonic vibrations. "Their technology has advanced beyond ours." "Not necessarily," Crixinel argued. The Ghost proved that unconventional tactics could work. Hit-and-run attacks, sabotage, psychological warfare. A massive Gorian student, Thokdar, rumbled his disagreement. The Ghost is history. We need real solutions. The Ghost is the solution. Crixnell's fur bristled with frustration. Look at their operational patterns. They never fought the Devourers head-on. They struck at weak points, supply lines, command structures. Sarah watched the debate with growing tension. Part of her wanted to reveal herself, to take command and organize the kind of resistance that had once driven the Devourers from the galaxy. But another part whispered warnings about the cost of such a revelation. Even if you're right, Zephyra chimed, the Ghost was one individual with unique capabilities. We're students. Then we learn, Crixnell insisted. We study their methods and apply them. With what? Thokdar demanded. We have training weapons and simulator programs. Sarah found herself speaking before she could stop herself. There are weapon caches hidden throughout the Academy. Emergency supplies placed during the original war and never removed. The room fell silent. Everyone stared at her. How do you know that? Zephyra asked. Sarah's mind raced for a plausible explanation. I've been studying the Academy's construction records. When they built this place 50 years ago, they included defensive preparations that were classified at the time. It was half true. She did know about the weapons caches, but only because she had helped place some of them during a desperate mission near the end of the original war. Commander Thalex entered the briefing room before anyone could ask more questions. His scales had darkened to a grim shade that indicated bad news. The outer defense perimeter has fallen, he announced. Devourer ground forces will reach the Academy within 6 hours. The weight of destiny settled on Sarah's shoulders again, heavier than ever. 6 hours to decide whether to remain Sarah Chen and probably die with her classmates, or become the Ghost again and save them. Sir, she said, standing up, I volunteer to lead a reconnaissance mission to assess enemy positions. Thalex's eyes narrowed. This isn't a training exercise, Cadet Chen. Real reconnaissance means real danger. I understand, sir. The commander studied her for a long moment. Something in his expression suggested he saw more than a nervous student volunteer. Very well. Select a team and prepare for departure in 1 hour. As the briefing dispersed, Crixnell caught up with her in the corridor. Sarah, what are you doing? You're not trained for reconnaissance. None of us are trained for this, she replied, but someone has to try. Then I'm coming with you. Sarah wanted to refuse, but she realized she might need his tactical insights and his knowledge of her own past operations. Fine, but you follow my orders exactly. Since when do you give orders? Crixnell asked, but he was smiling with nervous excitement. An hour later, Sarah led a small team through the Academy's service tunnels toward the surface. She had changed into dark clothing and carried equipment that officially came from the Academy's emergency supplies. In reality, most of it was her own gear, carefully integrated to avoid suspicion. The other team members were Zephyra, whose crystalline nature made her nearly invisible in certain light conditions, and Thokdar, whose massive strength could prove useful. Sarah had chosen them because they were competent, but not too observant, unlikely to notice if she demonstrated skills beyond her supposed training. The surface of Zerion Prime was a nightmare landscape of destroyed structures and burning wreckage. The Academy's shields created a dome of relative safety, but beyond their perimeter, Devourer forces had established landing zones and were constructing the biomechanical structures they used as temporary bases. There, Sarah whispered, pointing to a cluster of enemy positions. 3 landing zones, with what looks like a command nexus in the center. Through her binoculars, she could see the familiar sight of Devourer architecture. Organic curves, blended with mechanical precision, creating buildings that seemed to grow rather than being constructed. It was technology that had once seemed impossible to defeat. "How do we get closer?" Crixnell asked. Sarah studied the terrain, her mind automatically calculating approach routes, guard patterns, and strike opportunities. "There's a maintenance tunnel system that runs under this section. If we can reach the eastern landing zone, we might be able to gather intelligence on their numbers and capabilities." What she didn't say was that the tunnel system would also provide access to the command nexus's power core, which could be overloaded to create a devastating explosion. She had used similar tactics dozens of times during the original war. They made their way carefully through the ruins, moving from cover to cover, while Sarah's enhanced senses mapped the enemy positions. The others thought she was just being careful. But she was actually cataloging targets and planning attack routes. The tunnel entrance was exactly where she remembered it, hidden beneath a collapsed communications array. As they descended into the darkness, Sarah activated a small light that cast eerie shadows on the tunnel walls. "How did you know about this tunnel?" Zephyra asked. "Lucky guess," Sarah replied. "The Academy's blueprints showed maintenance access throughout this area." They moved in single file through the narrow passage, their breathing the only sound in the oppressive darkness. Sarah led them with confidence born of experience, though she pretended to check her scanner frequently to maintain the illusion of uncertainty. The tunnel emerged in a storage chamber directly beneath the eastern landing zone. Above them, they could hear the rhythmic thud of devourer machinery and the chittering communication of the alien soldiers. "Stay here," Sarah whispered. "I'm going to scout ahead." Before anyone could protest, she slipped through a ventilation grate into the level above. What she saw made her blood run cold. The devourers had learned from their defeat. Their new soldiers were larger, more heavily armored, and carried weapons that pulsed with unfamiliar energy. Worse, they had developed some kind of detection network that would make stealth infiltration nearly impossible. But Sarah had learned too. 50 years of thinking about that war, of analyzing her own tactics and imagining improvements. She knew exactly how to adapt. When she returned to the storage chamber, her teammates were huddled together in nervous silence. "Well?" Crixnell whispered. Sarah looked at her friends, these innocent students who had been thrust into a war they never should have faced. They deserved to know the truth, but they also deserved to live. "I have a plan," she said finally, "but you're not going to like it." Sarah stared at the faces of her teammates in the dim light of the storage chamber. 3 young beings who trusted her leadership, who believed she was just another cadet like them. In a few moments, that illusion would be shattered forever. "The Devourers have established a central command nexus," she began, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions inside her. "It's heavily defended, but there's a way to reach it through the power distribution network." "That sounds incredibly dangerous," Zephyra chimed softly, her crystalline form refracting the light into nervous patterns. "It is," Sarah admitted. "But if we can overload their power core, we can take out the entire command structure and buy time for the Academy's defenses." Thokdar's rocky features creased with concern. "How do you know about their power systems?" The question Sarah had been dreading. She looked at Crixnell, whose golden eyes watched her with growing suspicion. He had studied the Ghost's operations for months, knew every detail of how they had fought the Devourers. "Because," Sarah said quietly, "I've done this before." The silence stretched between them like a chasm. She could see understanding dawning in Crixnell's expression, confusion in the others. "During the war," she continued, "I wasn't Sarah Chen. I was someone else. Someone the galaxy called the Ghost." Crixnell's mouth fell open. "That's impossible. The Ghost was—" "You were 17 when it started," Sarah finished. My family was killed in the first wave of attacks on Kepler Station. I was the only survivor. She began unpacking her real equipment from the hidden compartments in her gear. The modified plasma rifle, the targeting systems, the armor that bore the scars of 100 battles. I spent 7 years hunting them, she said, checking her weapon's charge. Learning their weaknesses, disrupting their operations, killing their commanders. Everything you studied, every operation you mapped, that was me. Thokdar backed away slightly, his massive frame somehow diminished. You're a legend, a myth. I'm a person, Sarah corrected. A person who got very good at killing because the alternative was letting innocent people die. She finished assembling her equipment and turned back to face them. Gone was any pretense of being a student. This was the ghost, the terror that had haunted Devourer nightmares for 7 years. Here's what's going to happen, she said in a voice that brooked no argument. You 3 are going back to the academy. You're going to tell Commander Thalex that I'm dead and that you barely escaped. You're going to help organize the defense and keep our people alive. What about you? Crixnell asked, though his expression suggested he already knew. I'm going to do what I did 50 years ago. I'm going to remind the Devourers why they should fear the dark. Zephyra's harmonic voice carried a note of protest. You can't face their entire force alone? Sarah smiled, and for the first time in 50 years, it was the predatory smile of the ghost. I'm not going to face them. I'm going to hunt them. She led them back through the tunnels to a point where they could safely return to the academy. As they prepared to separate, Crixnell grabbed her arm. All this time, he said, his voice filled with awe and confusion. You let me study your own operations. You listened to me theorize about your tactics. You were surprisingly accurate, Sarah admitted. Your analysis was better than most military historians. Why didn't you tell me? Sarah looked at her friend, this young being who had unknowingly spent months learning from his own hero. Because Sarah Chen wanted a normal life. She wanted friends who saw her as a person, not a weapon. And now? Now the galaxy needs the ghost more than Sarah Chen needs to be normal. She turned and walked back into the darkness, leaving her teammates to find their way home. Behind her, she heard Crixnell call out, For what it's worth, you were a good friend too. The words followed her into the shadows. Moving through the Devourer-occupied territory felt like returning to a familiar nightmare. The enemy had improved their detection systems, but Sarah had spent 50 years thinking about how to counter every advancement they might make. She flowed through their perimeter like smoke, avoiding patrols and sensor sweeps with practiced ease. The command nexus rose from the planet's surface like a malignant growth, all biomechanical curves and pulsing energy conduits. Sarah studied it from concealment, mapping guard rotations and identifying key structural weaknesses. The Devourers had learned, but they had also become predictable. Their improvements followed logical patterns that she could anticipate. They had made themselves stronger, but not more creative. That would be their downfall. Sarah's first target was the communication array that coordinated the invasion fleet. She approached it during a shift change, when the guards were momentarily distracted. Her plasma rifle, set to minimum power to avoid detection, fired precise shots that severed critical connections without causing explosions. Within minutes, the Devourer fleet found itself operating without coordination. Ship commanders began making independent decisions, breaking formation and exposing themselves to the Academy's defensive fire. Her second target was the power distribution network she had identified earlier. The Devourers routed all their energy through central conduits, a design that was efficient but vulnerable. Sarah planted charges at 3 key junctions, timed to create a cascading overload. As explosions lit the night sky and enemy positions went dark, panic spread through the Devourer forces. They knew someone was attacking them, but their sensors showed nothing. The ghost had returned, and she was just as invisible as before. Sarah's third target was psychological. She infiltrated a barracks facility and left behind evidence of her presence without harming anyone inside. Weapons moved from their storage locations. Guards found their posts reassigned. Equipment mysteriously malfunctioned. By morning, the Devourer ground forces were jumping at shadows, convinced they were being stalked by an enemy they couldn't see or fight. But Sarah saved her most devastating attack for last. The command nexus contained not just the invasion's leadership, but also the biological computers that coordinated their military operations. Destroying it would cripple their ability to conduct organized warfare, just as it had during the original war. The security around the nexus was formidable, but Sarah had infiltrated similar facilities dozens of times. She waited for the confusion created by her other attacks to reach its peak, then moved when the guards were most distracted. The interior of the command nexus was a maze of organic corridors and mechanical chambers. Sarah navigated it from memory, her decades-old knowledge of Devourer architecture serving her well. The layout had changed in details, but the fundamental design remained the same. She found the central processing chamber exactly where she expected it to be. The biological computers that ran the invasion floated in nutrient tanks, their neural networks pulsing with data streams from across the galaxy. Sarah placed her final charges with surgical precision, targeting the life support systems that kept the computers functional. When they detonated, the entire Devourer military network would collapse. As she prepared to leave, a voice spoke from the shadows. "The legendary ghost!" Sarah spun, her rifle raised, to face a figure she recognized from her worst nightmares, Supreme Commander Vashistar, the Devourer leader who had personally overseen the destruction of her home colony. His exoskeleton had been enhanced with mechanical augmentations, and his black eyes held the cold intelligence that had made him so dangerous. "I wondered if you would return," he said, his translated words carrying overtones of satisfaction. "When we began this new invasion, I hoped you might emerge from whatever hole you had hidden in." "Disappointed to see me?" Sarah asked, her weapon trained on his center mass. "Quite the opposite. You cost us much during the First War. Your death will be a fitting prize for our return." Around them, hidden Devourer soldiers emerged from concealment. Sarah had walked into a trap, led by her own overconfidence and the assumption that the enemy hadn't changed enough to surprise her. "You see," Vashistar continued, "we learned from our defeat. We studied your methods, analyzed your tactics. We know you work alone, strike quickly, and rely on stealth. So we prepared an ambush that accounts for all of those factors." Sarah's mind raced through possible escape routes, but the chamber had been well chosen. Only one entrance, no cover, surrounded by enemies. It was the kind of tactical situation she had spent 50 years learning to avoid. "The galaxy thinks you're a hero," Vashistar said, raising his own weapon. "But I know what you really are, a killer who got lucky." "You're right," Sarah replied. "I am a killer." She triggered the detonator. The explosion that followed didn't destroy just the biological computers, but the entire structural foundation of the command nexus. As the building collapsed around them, Sarah threw herself into the chaos, using the confusion to fight her way toward the exit. Devourer soldiers died in the rubble, but Vashistar survived, his augmented exoskeleton protecting him from the falling debris. He pursued her through the collapsing structure, firing energy bolts that missed by mere inches. Sarah burst from the ruins as the entire command nexus folded in on itself, its destruction sending shockwaves through every Devourer installation on the planet. Around her, enemy forces were already beginning to retreat as their coordination network failed. But Vashistar was still coming. The final confrontation took place in the ruins of a destroyed city, among the wreckage of buildings that had once housed innocent families. Sarah and the Supreme Commander faced each other across a landscape of devastation, both wounded but still deadly. 50 years I have waited for this moment, Vashatar snarled, his weapon crackling with energy. Then I hope it's worth the wait, Sarah replied. They fired simultaneously. Sarah's shot was more accurate, punching through Vashatar's chest armor and sending him crashing to the ground. His shot went wide, scarring the rubble beside her. As the Supreme Commander lay dying, he looked up at her with something like respect. You are not what we expected. I'm exactly what you made me, Sarah said quietly. The Devourer fleet, leaderless and uncoordinated, began its retreat within hours. Some ships tried to maintain their positions, but without central command, they fell to the Academy's reorganized defenses. By the end of the day, the invasion was over. Sarah watched the enemy ships disappear into hyperspace from a hilltop overlooking the Academy. The Ghost had saved the galaxy again, but this time, the cost felt different. This time, she wasn't alone. I thought you might be here. She turned to find Crixinel approaching, still wearing his Academy uniform, but carrying himself with new confidence. Behind him came Zephyra and Thokdar, along with Commander Thalex. The Academy is safe, Crixinel reported. The Devourer fleet has been scattered, and our reinforcements are arriving. Good, Sarah said simply. Commander Thalex stepped forward, his ancient eyes studying her with new understanding. I should have recognized you sooner. There were signs, but I dismissed them as coincidence. I tried to be someone else, Sarah explained. I wanted to believe the war was over. It is now, Thalex said. The Devourer leadership is broken, their fleet scattered. This invasion was their last chance at conquest. Sarah nodded. But her attention was focused on her young friends. They looked at her differently now, with a mixture of awe and uncertainty that broke her heart. So what happens now? Zephyra asked. Do you disappear again? Sarah considered the question. The Ghost could vanish back into legend, leaving Sarah Chen to continue her studies. But she had learned something important during this crisis. She had learned that running from her past hadn't healed her wounds, and that pretending to be normal hadn't made her happy. No, she said finally. I think it's time for the Ghost to retire permanently. And Sarah Chen? Crixinel asked hopefully. Sarah smiled, and this time it was entirely human. Sarah Chen is going to finish her education. She's going to become the best tactical instructor this academy has ever seen. And she's going to make sure that the next generation knows how to protect the galaxy without having to become legends to do it. Commander Thalex's scales shifted to a pleased golden hue. I think that can be arranged. As they walked back toward the academy together, Crixinel fell into step beside her. I have to ask, all those times I was analyzing your operations, explaining your tactics back to you, what was that like? Sarah laughed, a sound free of the shadows that had haunted her for so long. Educational. You understood my methods better than I did sometimes. Think you could teach me some of the techniques you never used in the war? Only if you promise to use them to protect people, not to hunt enemies. Deal, Crixinel agreed. Though I have to say, having the Ghost as a study partner is going to make my tactical analysis projects much easier. Former Ghost, Sarah corrected. And if you want easy tactical projects, you should have made friends with someone else. They reached the academy as the sun set behind Zarion Prime's swirling storms. The damage from the battle was extensive, but it could be repaired. The students and faculty had survived, and the galaxy was safe once more. Sarah Chen had finally come home. In the years that followed, the Galactic Military Academy would become famous for producing the finest tactical officers in known space. Students would travel from across the galaxy to study under Professor Chen, whose unconventional methods and deep understanding of asymmetric warfare revolutionized military thinking. None of them knew they were learning from a legend. Sarah never spoke of her past unless directly asked, and then only to teach tactical lessons. She became known for her brilliance, her compassion for her students, and her absolute refusal to discuss the theoretical identity of the ghost. The ghost was a product of desperate times, she would tell curious students. We live in better times now. Instead of creating more ghosts, let's create better guardians. And in quiet moments, when she stood on the Academy's observation deck looking out at the stars, Sarah Chen would remember the frightened teenager who had lost everything and learned to fight back. That girl had saved the galaxy twice, but more importantly, she had learned that heroes don't have to be legends. Sometimes they can just be teachers, passing on their hard-won wisdom to the next generation of protectors. The ghost was gone, but her legacy lived on in every student who learned that courage isn't about being fearless. It's about being afraid and choosing to protect others anyway.